Welcome, everybody. Everybody hear me okay? Hushing, hushing, hush, hush, hush. I love the hum and thrum of the conversations that are already happening. It's part of the joy of today, hopefully. My name is Catherine Cleary, and I'm so grateful that you're all here today for NatureWorks. It's a conference that would not have happened without many, many people who I'm going to thank at the end. But my role here is now to just welcome you. Thank you for coming. Enjoy the shared experience of having a little blessing from Galway rain for those of us who were outside in the pocket forest. We organised that just to make it a more bonding experience. And also to shout out to Declan, the arborist, who was in his bare feet. So he's now the barefoot arborist. Well done, Declan. So the three themes, that's difficult to say, three themes today are attention. So we paid attention to our environment, thanks to Katrina and Fiona's wonderful grounding session. We paid attention to what it feels like to be in a body, to be in an ecosystem ourselves. We are an ecosystem. We are part of nature. We don't need to reconnect with nature. We're already part of it, but we need to reconnect. So that attention is the first theme. Then there's the theme of voice. So how do we give nature a voice? How do we make sure that nature is everybody's business? And then there's action. So hopefully those three themes will resonate with all of you. And I'm going to hand over to Alma and Sinead, who are going to take us through the next stage. Thank you.
Hi everybody, my name is Dr. Sinead Sheehan. I'm from the School of Psychology and the Rhine Institute. Myself and my colleague, Dr. Alma Clavin, will guide you through the day today and introduce the speakers along the way. And the first thing I want to do is to thank the sponsor, Life's Too Good Foundation, and our partners, Pocket Forests and the Rhine Institute. So Life's Too Good was set up by James and Maria Murphy in 2017, and it invests in organisations that make a positive impact on people's lives. Its strategic plan places focus on climate change and environmental issues. Pocket Forests is a social enterprise based in Dublin, founded in 2020 by Ash Conrad Jones. It helps communities to improve urban spaces by growing pockets of native forests and shrubs, which together create thriving soil, a love of nature and wildlife and climate resilience. The Rhine Institute is University of Galway's multidisciplinary research institute for advancing sustainability research and practice across four main thematic areas. These are marine and coastal, energy and climate change, agriculture and bioeconomy, and environmental and health.
So, as Sinead has said, we'll be guiding you through the day. So part of that, I have some practical things to say. First of all, this is your fire exit here. The toilets are just outside to the right. We will be recording the event today, and that includes the questions and comments. So if you don't want your question or comment included, just let us know and we will remove it from the recording. And then finally, please switch your phones off. So we have two excellent speakers coming up in the next few minutes. So please turn off your phones if you haven't done so already. So our first speaker today is Frances Crowe, and you will have seen her amazing tapestry on the flyer, which is on the screen. So Frances is an award-winning tapestry artist based in Roscommon. Her art practice seeks to name and reframe important social and cultural issues that have resulted in much suffering and the displacement of the poorest peoples, particularly women and children. Welcome, Frances.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and thanks to Catherine Cleary for the opportunity to present.
That's the full image there.
Great. Yeah. Thanks. The image on the poster is of tapestry woven wall hanging made many moons ago as part of my final degree show in the National College of Art and Design, Dublin, circa 1980, titled Nature's Hues. It is 1 year's work. I researched and developed ideas around using natural fibres such as raw wool, jute and linen to make a material suitable for weaving. The colours were derived from plants such as lichens, onion skins, weld, gorse, nettles, walnut shells, blackberries and sloes, indigo and cochineal. I've had it in my own collection for 45 years, and it's still as vibrant and lively as the first day I wove it. It is also the start of my career as an artist working in the medium of woven tapestry. Over that long period, spanning 4 decades, I've been working in my rural studio in County Roscommon, where I create commissioned pieces for public and private spaces. I've been selected into many group exhibitions in Ireland, the UK, Canada and China. And more recently, I've presented 2 solo shows. In 2024, Story Cloths, Gestures, Journeys and Genealogies in the Custom House and Studio Gallery, Westport. And in 2025, Threads of Witness in Anton Art Centre in Dundalk. My art practice involves a deep engagement with the important social, justice and cultural issues of our time, impacting on the most vulnerable people, as was mentioned. Displacement, family separation and climate change are a constant theme. Tapestry is created in slow time, built up on a grid structure inch by inch. Each square inch of cloth responding and representing many hours of hand, eye, heart, aesthetic decision and gesture. My current body of work explores the destruction of the olive trees in the West Bank of Palestine, weaving a web of resistance, hope and resilience in dark times. Thank you.
So our next guest speaker is Professor Cecil Kinainadike. Cecil has over 30 years of experience studying, teaching and advising on aspects of urban forestry and nature-based solutions. He's widely considered as one of the world's leading urban forestry experts. Cecil has held full and visiting professorships in urban forestry and green space management at universities in Belgium, Canada, China, Denmark, Hong Kong, and Sweden. So welcome, Cecil.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation. Wonderful to be in Galway. It's, I think, 15 years ago or so that I was here for the last time, and things are changing rapidly. So pretty interesting to see. And a little bit of rain doesn't hurt either. I got pretty wet this morning walking from the city center, but as I told the organizers, I'm Dutch, so I'm also used to it. Thanks for the wonderful invitation to come here. Thanks to the organizers. And the issue of bringing forests back into our cities, either big or small, is lies very close to my heart. So I travel the world trying to convince people to embrace trees physically, but also mentally, and to bring trees and forests back into our lives. And one of the things that I did pretty recently is to come with this idea of the 3-30-300 rule or principle. Can I just see hands for those of you who know about it? 3-30-300? Okay, a few, yeah, about 1/3. Good, so there's a bit of new information here done for you as well. And I will focus very much on the role of 2 elements really here. One is big trees. Really, we need big trees in our cities, which is not always easy because of lack of space, but also, of course, sometimes mental resistance, people's resistance against having big creatures, big organisms like trees close to them. And sometimes they feel these trees are threatening in some ways. And then, of course, given the focus also on pocket forest, the idea of small woods in forms and shapes that can vary is another point I will highlight. So first of all, of course, I'm not saying anything new, that we live in a interesting, volatile world these days. And it feels almost like every day when you look at the news, things are getting worse in some way, but also in the other hand, maybe creating opportunities for us who are passionate about trees and green and nature in our cities. But the reality is, of course, we have climate change, we have heat waves in our cities that cause many deaths, premature deaths during summers. We had, of course, COVID that led us all to maybe reappreciate nearby nature But then, yeah, some studies show that actually the fact that we don't always have nature close to us results in Europe alone in about 43,000 deaths per year, premature deaths. So people die prematurely because of lack of access to nature and trees. We also know from quite some studies now that although we know about the benefits of trees and green, the reality is that we're losing a lot of green space cover and we lose a lot of tree canopy cover. So just some studies here, European studies, Canadian studies, and a Dutch study, a recent Dutch study that shows that in our 20 big cities in the Netherlands, 70% of the neighborhoods have too little green space and actually decreasing green space and tree canopy cover. So these are really big issues. Because, of course, as I will show later in my talk, and as probably you're all aware of, trees and green space are not just nice to have, they're absolutely necessary for our communities because of the health benefits, the climate benefits, biodiversity, educational, you name it. There's a lot of reasons why we need more trees and green spaces. Unfortunately, there are some fantastic initiatives going on. It's almost like every day there's something new. We have biophilic cities, we have tiny forests, we have pocket forests, we have nature-positive cities, whatever that may be. We have this idea of urban forestry, which is my own field, which I'll say a little bit more about. And now we even have national urban parks, like in cities like Belfast, city authorities are trying to set up national parks. And one of the first, of course, was the city of London, who called itself a national park, national urban park, not so long ago. So I try to read widely. I'm a forester by training, but a bit of a closet landscape architect and environmental psychologist. And one thing I really enjoy is reading widely about things that relate to our relationship to nature. And one of the really nice reads of the last years is this book by an Italian writer called Stefano Mancuso, who talks about the plant city, Phytopolis. And he talks about how important it is for us to really bring plants back into our cities, but actually also structure our cities using plants. So he talks about tree streets, for example, and he talks really about, we have to pay more respects to these beings, to plants, to trees that are close to us. I already showed you this in a small version, but of course we also know that trees and nature and forests come in different shapes and sizes, from the very urban, very, very urban, like center of Galway, center of Dublin, but of course also the more far away forests and landscapes that are more and more becoming urbanized too, because we see urban uses, urban values, urban politics impacting those. And I would say that is really my field that I discovered when I was in university in Wageningen in the Netherlands 35 years ago now. I was looking for something that could connect cities and forest, people and nature. And I came across this really interesting concept called urban forestry. And basically what urban forestry does is it brings like all the trees, all the green spaces into the city, into one system. And it looks at the city as if it were a forest with a long-term plan for growing the urban forest. It looks, of course, at communities and participatory approaches. It looks at the urban conditions under which to grow trees. It has this very long-term perspective, so really, almost like the perspective of a tree life rather than a political cycle, which is usually our focus in urban areas. And also, very importantly, it's not the domain of one single discipline. It's really an interdisciplinary field and profession that brings people from the social sciences, the natural sciences, but also the humanities. I think one of the things that I've come to realize after having been an academic for about 30 years, is that there's all this wonderful research and there's more and more great research coming every day, but the way people are applying this research is often falling behind. So despite all the good things we know about trees and green, how essential they are, implementation in policy and practice is often really limited. And this is not only the case for us here or in the Netherlands, but actually I was in New Jersey, US last week, I came back on Monday, and there they're even struggling more to get all that great science that they have into practice and into policy, especially, of course, in current political climates where things are really challenging for our urban tree colleagues. So what do we do, right? How do we make the message maybe even more simple? Because the complexity of the research, the complexity of how to use it, sometimes holds back, I think, decision makers and practitioners to implement it. So for the Nordic Council of Ministers, I created a small policy brief, really trying to zoom in on 4 basic principles for green space planning in our cities. First of all, everybody should have trees and green close, this idea of proximity. And that also includes, as we realized during the COVID pandemic, visibility. It's really important to be able to see trees and green from where you live, where you work, where you go to school, or maybe where you're cared for. Of course, we need well-connected green networks where it's safe to move between green spaces, where it's safe to move from one place to another in the city for our children, for our elderly people, for people of different backgrounds. We need diversity, and diversity I really define very broadly. So it's a diversity of green and nature experiences. It's a diversity of trees, but it's also a diversity of people. We have to respect, of course, that people have very different wishes and very different preferences when it comes to urban nature. And finally, and this word I have to use very carefully these days when I go to the US, because it's seen as a political term, equity. So the idea of actually nature is a human right. Everybody should have access to nature, as we all have access to clean water, to good infrastructure, to education. Nature access should actually be part of that. And there's even some voices going up that we should take this to the International Court of Justice and actually make sure that we recognize the right to nature as a human right. So let's then zoom into some of the evidence, right? What could we actually say about trees and green in our cities? Well, we know if we let trees grow old and large, then they will provide a lot of benefits, and sometimes even exponentially so. So large trees provide many, many more benefits than even a lot of small trees. So it's really important to try to find space for those big iconic trees wherever we can. Also, as I said, right, we have to bring trees and green close to people. It should be easy for us to be with trees, to be with nature. It should not be too much of an effort to get in contact with them. We also know that green views are important, for example, around schools, but also around our homes. It really helps us to stay sane. It also gives us these little micro breaks that research show are really important in terms of our mental reflection or mental restoration. We had this wonderful meditation exercise this morning, but also our creativity. It helps us actually to kind of rewire ourselves. So just look out of your window, look at the tree for even 30 seconds. It will help you to be more creative and better in problem solving. We need to offer a variety of experiences and actually enhancing our tree canopy cover. So many, many cities, also in Ireland, have tree canopy covers that are too low, according to the research. And I'll zoom into that, how high we should go really to have a good canopy cover. We should also, of course, manage negative impacts, because it is a fact that in a society where people are more removed from nature, more removed from the land, there's also sometimes a fear. People are afraid of nature, they're afraid of nuisances. I sometimes tell the story of my parents, lovely people. They live on one of the most beautiful alleys in the Netherlands, in the city of Apeldoorn. They have these beautiful linden trees in their street. And they know what I'm doing, of course, what my work is. And still, every time when the lime trees start getting sticky and the little dogs they have start getting stuck to the sidewalks, they start complaining about these trees. And I have to tell them every time again, well, look at what the view you have, right? Look at the benefits you get. So people do get wound up a little bit sometimes in these little nuisances. And then really, to keep the urban forest diverse and resilient is really important as well. So I don't expect you to read the first story that's in Dutch or in Flemish, but really more and more studies are showing this relevance of big trees. Big trees that show, of course, that can absorb pollution, that can shade, but also actually have mental health benefits. A study they did in Brussels, the University of Leuven did that, looking at people living in areas with big trees compared to people living in areas with a lot of small trees. And it turns out that people with big trees around them used much less mental health medication. So they were actually much healthier mentally, and even controlled for things like education, background, age, and these kind of things. So there's definitely something about big trees also for our mental health. I think this piece of research is actually has been really influential for me in my work as well. This is work we did for the Flemish government in Belgium, and they asked us, a group of consultants, well, we know quite a lot about the health benefits of trees and forests. Can you boil this down to some really clear guidelines at different levels and scales, a type of green space, elements of green structure? And we did that, and we made this really interesting handbook, which unfortunately is only in Dutch. But we actually also found that there are 4 key interventions that we can do to promote people's health and well-being, and where we can have the biggest wins. And you can already start thinking for yourself a little bit what these are. Here they are. So it's increasing our canopy cover, tree canopy cover. Really, every % you can increase, you'll see increases in health benefits, in cooling benefits, air pollution control, etc. Pocket parks and pocket forests. So bringing those smaller green spaces close to people as little places to restore, for children to play and meet, is another one where you can really make some substantial benefits. Community gardens, where people garden together, grow food together, meet each other, where you have social interactions, is another one. And finally, one that comes also consistently out of the literature, if we can green our schoolyards, our school environments, then this has really big impacts on children's learning behavior. Studies done in Barcelona, where I lived for a few years, show that children who are in green school environments are much, much better in solving problems, complex learning tasks, than children who are in non-green school environments. And again, they control this also for education background, cultural background, etc. And of course, the trend, unfortunately, is that we see a decrease in green around schools in many countries because we feel it's unsafe. Parents are maybe complaining, who's going to maintain this? But it's really the worst thing we can do, right, to get green out of children's environments. This is also an interesting study. This is done by the Barcelona Institute of Global Health, one of the big public health research institutes in Europe. And they found that if we can go up to about 30% tree canopy cover in our cities, then we can cool the cities sufficiently. It's only 1 or 2 degrees, so that during heat waves, we can actually save the lives of about 1/3 of the people who die prematurely because of heat waves. 1/3. What does that mean? Well, in Europe in 2003, we had about 70 to 80,000 people who died prematurely because of heat. We had this immense heat wave. So we could have saved 20 to 30,000 lives, or prolonged those lives at least, if we would have had enough canopy cover. So I always say that this slide is probably the one slide that I can show to politicians that they start to look, oh wow, we didn't realize that this is so important. So really important data, good research. This was a study done, I think, in 93 European cities, so pretty well developed. And right now in a new project, European project called Resonate, we're actually looking specifically at nature-based therapy and how nature-based therapies of different kinds and types can impact our health and well-being. So we're looking at things like forest bathing, we're looking at things like people walking in mountains, we're looking at coastal interactions, mindfulness, and then for different types of groups of patients and residents. And it's really showing already some pretty interesting results about how important it will be for us to engage more with nature, also maybe when we're not feeling so well. So we're doing this global spotlights across the world now, promoting some of the research. This all sounds great, right? But how do we make this concrete, specific? What kind of metrics could we use to show all these wonderful benefits of trees and green and actually make them ready for politicians, for decision makers, for communities, for businesses, for developers to work? And there was that one day in February 2021, in the midst of the, I think, 3rd COVID wave, when I was in Barcelona, still ready to move to Vancouver, getting a little bit stressed about moving in the pandemic, looking out of my window, and I saw these really nice trees and green spaces that I could see just near me. And I was just thinking, how important are these, right? And then it started clicking in my head that maybe we need some kind of guideline or metric. Maybe we need something easy, an easy message that is still evidence-based, but that will appeal to people, irrespectively of your background, of your profession, of your level of knowledge, of your age. Everybody should be able to relate to it. And I thought, okay, three trees, right? Some kind of indicator for seeing enough green space around us. We know from research that trees are really appreciated, the view of trees. If it's 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 trees, of course, we don't really know, but 3 trees will be a good kind of indicator from different sides of your house. Then we also know that 30% canopy cover really is a good threshold for health benefits, for cooling benefits. It should almost go up to 40% per neighborhood. And finally, in line with the World Health Organization, everybody should live within a 300 meters distance, no more than 300 meters, from a high quality park or green space. So then it clicked, right? 330, 300. And I put it on Twitter. I'm no longer on Twitter, no worry, I'm now on Blue Sky. But when Twitter was still politically okay, and actually it was really surprising. I put it on Twitter and LinkedIn, and I didn't think of it. And the next morning I woke up and it was completely gone viral. It was all over the place. I got called 8 o'clock from Switzerland, IUCN, the nature organization, say, can we post this on the website? Because this is exactly what we need. We need something. And then I started thinking, okay, maybe there's something to it. And I started thinking, like, how does it look, right? These are some images of the 3, the 30, and the 300. This is Zeist in the Netherlands. In the middle, you see the canopy in Amsterdam, in the museum area. And then a park. It doesn't have to be so spectacular. This is in Malmö, Sweden, just in a housing estate. A small green space that is offering different opportunities, experiences. So this 300-meter area should be safe. They should have high quality, and they should really allow for different types of experiences. Ideally with some trees and other vegetation, but there could also be other types of ecosystems that could fall under this 300. And there was actually quite some research that could underpin this. So I started digging, of course, a little bit further into it. And this idea of visible green and mental health for sure, living under tree canopies, cooling, but also social interactions. And then lots and lots that says, close proximity to parks and green spaces actually makes you more physically active. lots of studies that show that if you live in greener neighborhoods, you live longer. So yeah, quite some strong evidence. And again, also reading a little bit more broadly, a really wonderful book that came out recently by an American called Sam Block, who talks about shade, how our cities initially paid a lot of attention to shade creation, then kind of moved away to kind of worship the sun, and now we're coming back to shade as we are facing global warming and heat waves. And of course, one of the mechanisms, the elements he talks a lot about is actually, excuse me, is trees. So we have to bring trees back. So the evidence for the tree, there's actually the least evidence, I would say, for this kind of trees or green visibility. So you see some studies showing that, yeah, seeing nature is actually really good for us. It's good for our brains. There's something about maybe the fractal patterns, but still a little bit unclear what is really happening here. So yeah, we would have to. Oh, great, thank you. We would have to dig a little bit further. But there's actually one study done by Clemson University in the US that shows that people who can see 3 trees or more are mentally better off, have a better mental health status than people who cannot see 3 trees or more. So there's a little bit of evidence starting to point in that direction. Thank you. And then, yeah, the World Health Organization has said they have this report where they actually call for a maximum of 300 meters to an area of 0.5 to 1 hectare. So, yeah, a little bit bigger size, but I would say also if we cannot get 0.5 to 1 hectares, at least try to do something, right? Smaller than maybe a pocket forest or a small pocket park. Something definitely close to people is really important. And then quite some evidence on the canopy cover aspect. So this is a new study that showed that on an annual basis, about 12,000 people in Europe die because of air pollution that could be actually avoided if we would have enough tree canopy cover. So, and this is a study I think they did in 900 European cities or so, so pretty extensive. Studies also show that we have less problems with stormwater if we can meet the 300. Studies in Paris and in other cities that show that the peak flow could be reduced by 70%. So the kind of the heavy influx of rain on a day like today could be reduced substantially if we would meet the 300. If you get a layered vegetation in, you get a good kind of sponge effect of your vegetation. And also a national study in the Netherlands that just came out by the University of Utrecht that shows that there's a significant impact of living in a 300 neighborhood on your physical health and your weight. So people who live in 300 areas are physically healthier and also have less issues, less odds of being overweight. So yeah, it shows that there's definitely something to it. Sorry, this one I also wanted to show you a Swiss study by the University of Zurich that showed that if you can go up to about 30% canopy cover, you can have about 75% of bird diversity that you would have in a forest. So you could actually get very close to a forest bird diversity. And actually this would also mean enough insectivorous birds that would help control insects, like insects and diseases that could also impact those trees themselves. So some really interesting interactions that I think we should probably dig into a little bit further. Well, this is the most complex figure I'm going to show you, but I didn't want to hold back because this is actually a really good work done by Terry Hartig, an environmental psychologist in Sweden, the pathway domain framework. And what Terry tries to do is to dig into the relationship between nature and the impacts it has on health and well-being. And there are 4 pathways, right? So the one is reducing harm. So basically, for example, cooling, reducing pollution, etc. Then there's restoring capacities. So it actually helps us to restore our attention, get less stress. Well, we know, of course, from studies that people that go into a forest, heart rates drop, etc. after 5 minutes, right? So the effect is really very immediate. They've done these wonderful studies in the UK, an organization called Mind, where they compared a group of people going to a nature area after a stressful experience and people going shopping in a shopping mall. And the people in the shopping mall, the stress level stayed up all the way, while in the forest, of course, it dropped considerably. So maybe not for everybody. Yes? I guess for some people, shopping is really stress relieving, but definitely not for me. Then there's also building capacities in terms of making us more physically active, but also social capacities. And finally, of course, nature can cause harm in terms of allergies, in terms of maybe some risks that are caused, maybe some wild animals. We have the wolf coming back in the Netherlands now that's causing some societal debate because it's starting to come a little bit close to children and dogs. So yeah, so sometimes people feel nature is a little bit too wild and a little bit too dangerous. So the trick is, of course, to optimize the first 3 pathways, right? And then actually to make sure we manage the last one, so we reduce the harms. And I made a little non-scientific effort here to link the 4 pathways also to the 330-300, which actually really shows, I think, that my intuition of these 3 numbers and the 3 elements of canopy, visible green and recreational green makes sense also from this pathway model. And Terry and I talked about it. And he also felt like, yeah, you're onto something, right? It is a simplification, but actually this makes some sense as well from the research. And I'm very happy, by the way, to share my slides afterwards if you're interested. And then there's also there's a literature now, some of you may know it, about the issue of disvalues of nature or ecosystem disservices. I'm not so fond of that, but it talks about things, exactly, as wildlife encounters and allergies and how to manage those. Another thing that I often come across, of course, is the question, okay, great, Cecil, I work a lot with politicians and developers, and they always tell me, this is all wonderful, but what is really the euro value of all of this? Unfortunately, there's some great studies out there now from Central Park and from other places, from iTree, where we can actually start putting some money values also on these benefits. And one of the great studies that came out recently is from California, where they did a study among, I think, 7 or 8 million Californians with a healthcare provider called Kaiser Permanente. And they found out that people who live in green neighborhoods spend $374 or so a year less on healthcare. So, of course, healthcare providers are thinking, this is interesting, right? Because we're going to save money by greening our neighborhoods. And they start putting money into greening efforts, and they start putting money into research. And these kind of figures, unfortunately, are really important. So honestly, since I came with the 330-300 in February 2021, my life has been a bit chaotic because I've been literally every week there's journalists, people who want to talk about it, politicians, a lot of traveling and talking, which is great, right? Here you see some of the cities and some of the organizations that are using it. And my guess is that today there's thousands of municipalities across the world that have actually adopted it in some way. In the Netherlands only, about 75% of all municipalities have now incorporated the 330-300 as a guideline, as a norm, which is really amazing, right? And it shows also, I think there was really a lack of a clear guideline that could be used by planners, by green space managers, by tree people, by health professionals. And it even came so far as to, I've published a lot of papers in my life and books, etc. But the fact that I made it to the French Cosmopolitan, that was really, that was probably the highlight of my career, right? So, really nice story saying that, hey, if you live in a 330-300 neighborhood, you can be happy 24 hours a day. And also organizations like the World Economic Forum. It's actually always fun for me mostly fun for me every morning to open social media because there's always some funny story that comes out, like the World Economic Forum. Or the other day, not so long ago, a group of doctors, medical doctors in Belgium. This gentleman is a really influential physician in Belgium. He doesn't look so happy here, but he's a pretty jolly guy, I tell you. But he wrote this book together with his colleagues called Nature on the Doctor's Prescription. And he actually recommends on page 3 or 4 that, hey, let's do the 330-300 to keep people healthier, longer, active, engaged with nature. And then the minister in Belgium, the Flemish minister, picked up on that and said, you know what, we're going to implement the 330-300 as a national norm for green space, but actually also for health. So we're going to include this in our policies. And that was probably the first country that did that at the national level. And then there's some really great initiatives in different cities. One of the champion cities is the city of Malmö in Sweden, the second largest city in Sweden. And they were pretty quick to adopt it politically. And I spoke with the deputy mayor from the Green Party, who was actually the one driving this. She calls herself the mother of 330-300. I guess I'm the father then. So, but she said that they went into the negotiations with the Social Democratic Party to form the government. And they were pretty hard. They said, well, if we don't get the 330-300, we're not going to do it. So it was pretty amazing to hear that. And they actually managed to get it into the city master plan. So it's all the way up in the highest political level. And everything they do in terms of planning, in terms of neighborhood development, it all has to be 330-300 proof. And they have this conference every year where they get about 200 civil servants from all over the organization in the same room, 20 politicians, talking about the 330-300. So it's really amazing. I was there this year to feel it. And trees are becoming this kind of unifying element where people are getting together. And they do these wonderful studies as well, right? Because, how realistic is this? This is always the question, Cecil. It cannot be done. You cannot believe how often I hear that, right? 330-300, it cannot be done. Right. Let's look at Malmö, right? Because Malmö is not a city with a very high tree canopy. I think they're around like 12 or 13%. But they did a study for 3 neighborhood types, inner city, urban, suburban. And what they actually found is that, sorry, there's a little American spelling thing I realized, but in every neighborhood type, the canopy cover could be doubled over time. And this is just on public land, by thinking more clever about the underground infrastructure, about creating space for trees, for maybe having less grass, more trees. Even in the inner city areas, you could go up to almost 20%. And of course, cities change, right? They change very dramatically. So the fact that we say, oh, it's not possible, kind of ignores the fact that 50 years ago, Galway would have looked pretty different, and Dublin would have looked very different, and Cork would have looked very different. So how are our cities going to look in 50 years? Well, we can sit back and say, well, let's try to, hope that we have a few trees left. Or we can be proactive, right? And say we're going to steer and drive the cities of the future by having very good green networks using tools like the 330-300. And the nice thing is also that I try not to be too political. It's hard sometimes, I have to say. There's Dutch elections coming up now, and it's really tempting to jump in. But I try not to. I try to stay neutral. And there was this pretty right-wing mayor in Nice in France who all of a sudden realized, oh, there are these numbers, we can count, it has an economic impact, we're going to implement this. And they had this really nice study where they showed, well, how many people in Nice right now fulfill the 330-300, how many buildings, and also what can we do, what initiatives are we going to take? So we're going to put in new urban forests, new parks, new tree planting, better access. So a very specific program that also came with quite some money. So like Malmö, really making a difference. One of the most powerful things I realized I can do during my talks when I go to different places is to show maps, right? This is the map for one of the worst 330-300 cities in the world, Tokyo, Japan. I was there in May to give a talk, and the city planners were sitting in the audience, and Japanese people don't really show their emotion very clearly, but it was very clear to me here that they realized, oh, shit. We have a problem. Because the city is heating up very dramatically and actually is losing tree canopy cover from 9% about 10 years ago to 7% today. While the population is getting older, there's an aging population, heat is increasing. And I spoke with a Japanese colleague recently, and she said that she heard that last summer, a few thousand people died in Tokyo because of heat waves, elderly people. And elderly people just simply cannot go out of their houses anymore because it gets too hot. Unfortunately, this message is also coming home to the developers, to the architects, to the builders. They came to me, funny enough. So I had several companies in the Netherlands calling me and said, Cecil, we heard about this 330-300 thing. We're interested. Can we talk about it? And they started realizing that this is a metric they can understand, they can work with. It's not easy. But they said, you green people, right? You always had this very vague recommendations. Like, yeah, as many trees as possible. Yeah, as green as possible. Yeah, put green roofs. I said, finally, you're getting specific and concrete. That's wonderful. So now they start developing this 330-300 neighborhoods in the Netherlands. I had this guy standing up. He's the CEO of one of our biggest developers, Ballas Nedam. And he spoke at the same conference as me. And all of a sudden, he had this slide up, 330-300 for a new neighborhood in Utrecht that they're developing. And they're branding, marketing their new neighborhoods with it. And of course, business parks. If you look at the 330-300 maps, and I'm sure if we would do the same here, you see that those are the areas where there's least canopy, least green space. There's some terrible examples of people that have to take a lunch break, walking along a busy road to just make a little loop in their lunch break. We can do so much more, right, in these kind of areas as well. So moving towards the final part of my talk here. So how to apply, right, the 330-300? Well, you can apply it in different ways. It's not written in stone, obviously, right? There's research behind it, but it's a guideline. It's a rule of thumb. It's a metric. It's a communication tool. Or it could be a norm. In some cases, it is used like that. It depends, of course, on your context. It's scalable, so you can actually use it from the very local street level, hospital level, school level, all the way up to national assessments. Really important not to weaken it from the start, rather to say, well, we're not going to get there in the next 10 years or 20 years, but we have a plan and we're going to increase step by step on the three metrics. I think that's a much better way to do it. And definitely don't get stuck in limitations, which is the easy reaction, right? To say the Pavlov reaction of it cannot be done. Because actually, basically anything can be done. It depends on our priorities. And then, large trees as well, or these small woods, right, that we can use as these health-promoting small green spaces that we bring close to people, 300 meters or even closer, and that can have these educational values, etc. And then it can look like this. On the right, you see a neighborhood in the Netherlands called Kerkenbos, which is actually, where people have trees right in their face. And they love it. They pay, on average, for a house. Now, I know house prices in Ireland are pretty high too, but for the Netherlands, 1.5 to 2 million for a house or an apartment. So pretty expensive, and people really want to live here. Or you have Friedenau in Berlin, which is one of the densest areas in Berlin, which is also getting very close to the 330-300 because of these big trees that are in the streets. People live in like 3-story houses, and people want to live with big trees, which is often a problem in countries like the Netherlands. I'm not sure how it is here, but people are afraid, right? These big trees are going to be a nuisance or a problem. They're going to fall over. But the Germans love big trees in cities, so that makes it easier. Of course, as with any tree planting, we have to think about urban soils, right? What do we do to create good habitats for our trees? And that is often the problem because soils are disturbed. Soil volume is too limited for our trees. So we're doing a project in The Hague where we're trying for small tree plantings to really try to work with the soil, actually also bring school kids in to monitor the amount of worms in the soil, etc. Right? So it's really a really nice process, and we see that soils generally can be improved, of course, over time, and that's really a good way to move forward. Or you can go all the way up to the master, the mega level, like London is a forest, right? London calling itself a national park city, and also creating these really nice maps where you can see how all the green spaces are divided over the city, distributed over the city. And there's a certain amount of courage happening. You see now across Europe that many cities are actually starting to choose for trees and green. Cities like Paris, cities like London, cities like Groningen, but also a city like Seoul in Korea that actually took out a big 2-story highway and daylighted a river and created a river park. And the mayor, he was, of course, first, people thought he was crazy. Then he got elected to become the president of Korea, so I guess he did something right. Then he ended up in jail because he was corrupt. But anyway, he did something really brave, right, to tell the traffic engineers, like, no, we're not going to add a 3rd layer. We're actually going to take the whole highway away, and we're going to green. And this is just to show you Paris. This forest on the Place de Catalogne in central Paris, this used to be completely treeless. This was completely paved square. And the mayor of Paris, Ana Hidalgo, of course, said, well, we can keep our spaces as they are, then nobody will come out to Paris because it's going to be too hot. So now even City Hall Square, similarly, is going to be a mini forest. So cities are changing. Barcelona, you name it, these kind of cities are really, really changing. And even very non-tree-based cities like Athens in Greece are trying. So the mayor also there ran on a 330-300 agenda, didn't really succeed very well. He gets a lot of pushback now. But one thing he actually made happen is sponsorship with L'Oréal, where they're now creating a network of tiny forests across Athens. So again, it kind of at least stimulated something. Then back to Tokyo, I showed you those maps, right? They were really pretty bad looking. But this is a very nice initiative. This is the Otamachi Tower project. So this is the heart of Tokyo, really the center of the city, where you have the big Mitsubishi and Hitachi skyscrapers. And those people asked the Tokyo government, they said, no, we would like to have higher, like a few floors up on our skyscrapers. And then the Tokyo government said, okay, we can talk about it, but then you have to bring some trees and green space into the city. And what they did is they grew a forest outside of Tokyo for a few years, multi-layered, they developed the soil, and then they cut it up in pieces, put it on trains, and brought it into the city, re-established it, and it's actually really marvelous. I was there. It feels like you're entering a little forest environment now. There are trees, there are birds singing, there's insects, there's multi-layers, there's good humus in the soil. But of course, this costs about like 200 million euros, right? So this is not something we can, maybe a pocket forest is better sometimes. And then also countries like China. I've had the pleasure to work a lot in China. Lots of interesting things. Some of their parks are being changed into forests because the president, Xi Jinping, he loves forests and he wants the Chinese to experience forests in the cities. So you see a lot of parks, traditional parks in China being created. This is in Beijing. This is very close to Tiananmen Square, center of Beijing, where they have created this kind of overnight forest. But of course, it also comes with some drawbacks because there used to be a group of old men who came to the park with their bird cages. And they would sit around a nice area and the birds would sing and the guys would hang out and talk. They were retired. And all of a sudden, they find themselves in a forest and they have no space to really be together. So then, of course, you start wondering, social inclusiveness, right? How easy, how difficult can that sometimes be? And of course, also the context is very different. So my wife is from Atlanta, Georgia. So this is a city with 50% tree cover, which is kind of a dream for us in this part of Europe. But then I was also in Amman in Georgia, where my niece got married, and look at that city, right? Like there's no canopy, there's no trees, and it's very hot. But then if you go and visit people, like I visited the family of my niece's husband, go into a little courtyard and you see the pistachio trees, you see the plum trees, etc. People have their own little microforest, but you just don't see it in these pictures. And then, of course, when there's nothing, sometimes you also see that the people are kind of putting temporary forest in. I'm not always a big fan of it, but it makes a big impact, right? This is in Groningen, where they created this forest of Bosk, I think 3,000 trees. They were wheeled through the city from neighborhood to neighborhood. Every week you had a different neighborhood had a forest, and people loved it. And there's this wonderful, if you Google Bosk, you'll see there's this wonderful image of on YouTube where you see trees going by people's apartment windows. You see them film, and then walks the tree. And actually it really made a difference because people started saying, hey, we want that forest forever. And we did a recent one, not me, I was just a little bit involved in it, but in Amsterdam, when Amsterdam celebrated its 750 years, there was a temporary forest on one of the main highways. So it was pretty cool too. All right, moving towards the final slides here. So first of all, of course, we know a lot about the importance of trees and forest. And one of the really nice studies I've seen is by a colleague of mine called Marcus Hedblom from Sweden. And he looks at how young people, teenagers, react to birdsong. And it turns out that teenagers get very more relaxed. They enjoy having birdsong around them, right? So these kind of mechanisms, like the sounds of the city, being able to connect to nature in different ways, are so important. It's so important in a time when we're just overexposed to all these different things from social media, from news, these bad news stories that we hear all the time, right? This fact that we can hear a blackbird sing on a spring evening can make a world of a difference. One of the nicest doctoral studies I had the chance to advise on was by Inger Leerstrup, a Danish student, and she looked at forest kindergartens in Denmark and compared them to regular kindergartens, and found, of course, that kids going to forest kindergartens, being out in the forest all day, learned better, were less aggressive, were more mobile, had better balance skills. So it is a non-brainer, right? We have to keep our kids in contact with nature. And then with Trine Plambeck, we did a study on nature and the effect it has on the creativity of creative professionals, actors, sculptors, writers, and all of them, this is also in Denmark, all of them, of course, made it very clear that when they need inspiration, they need to go into what they call the incubation phase. They go to the forest, they go to the trees, they go to maybe the coast. So nature is really important. And it is really about making sure that we are not limiting, of course, access to nature to people who have the money for it, the political influence, that we really create parks and forests for everyone. And that we create this idea of tree equity across the world as well. So one idea I just wanted to bring up here towards the end of my talk is the idea of biocultural diversity, which I really caught on. It's a concept that developed in the global south. And it really connects the fact that there's biodiversity, right? There's the diversity of animals and plants and other organisms. And then on the other hand, there's also cultural diversity. And these two, of course, go hand in hand when you think about creating urban landscapes. So how can we use that connection, strengthen it, and recognize that urban landscapes are human co-created together with nature? And maybe think about, for example, the tree component as looking at doorstep trees that are important in our lives, that have special meaning, that we can maybe give a little bit of extra care, maybe a hug or recognition. It's funny, I mention always this idea of, okay, go and hug your doorstep tree. Depending on the audience, you see the reactions will be very different, right? So you're not too bad. But I've been to a group of planners, I've been to a group of civil engineers, and people are like... But then I speak to a group of school children, and they're all like, yay! And they all have their doorstep trees. They all love to have their little stories talked about. Then we need street woods. So we have to look at linear street woods that we create along our streets that have not just one single species, one single clone of trees. It looks symmetric. And then experts tell me, yeah, but this is what people like. I say, yeah, really? Is that so? Can we not be better as designers to do something more diverse, more interesting, like Singapore is doing or Malmö is doing, planting different tree species, different heights, and still also creating very nice street environments? And also the idea of groves, right? This idea of woodlands of different sizes that have special spiritual meaning, educational meaning, food growing, community, and bring that idea back of meaningful forest into our communities. And that really will help us then to keep places, not just to create them. There's this wonderful concept of place making, but what comes after placemaking, right? What do we do to really have stewardship, community engagement, to make sure that a pocket forest like here, right, that actually we have continued engagement and involvement of the people who are using it. We need the funding, like Future Woodland Scotland, they actually started using the 330-300 to fund green space and trees projects across Scotland. And then I should also realize that 330-300 is great, but there's a lot of different alternatives that are being brought up. So there's the 120-300, there's the 550-500, and now also the Finns, of course, because the Finns said, well, we already meet the 330-300, right? So, oh, there's somebody who says, yay, okay, very good. So the Finns made their own version of the 330-300. You see it here, it's pretty good. So at least 3 times a week to nature, no less than 30 minutes at a time, and ideally 300 minutes a week. So, so that's the way to do it. All right, finally, so I'm trying to keep a little bit of my academic roots, but I'm also writing more and more. So actually I wrote a book that hopefully I'm working with an agent right now to get it published, and it's actually now just called Tree Love. So it is about trying to really package all the knowledge and make sure that we start loving trees more, to recognize them for the beings they are. And I would argue that probably trees are the primary non-human being in our lives, right? We have pets, we have dogs and cats, I know. But just imagine what trees do for us in our communities, how they've helped us over time, the food they've provided, the shelter, etc. So if you're interested in the 330-300, there's a lot to be read. There's a website that I try to keep up to date with all the cities, etc., that are using it, research. There's also a handbook, the 330-300 handbook, that can help you step by step using it. And then being in a country of poets, I wanted to end with a part of a poem by Robert Frost, right? Tree at my window, window tree. My sash is lowered when night comes on, but let there never be curtain drawn between you and me. And I think that is really the core of the message. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you. We have a little bit of time for questions, I guess, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll be moving with the mics on both sides. And if you have any questions for Sassus, we have time for just a couple of questions.
Thank you. Yeah. Comments are also very welcome. Criticism is also very welcome.
How did you find local authorities regarded the financing of your proposal and the long-term financing?
Yeah, so I think one of the things I've noticed is that they use it as a way of generating more funding. So they actually say, you know, there's now a 330-300 mandate in new neighborhoods, 4 new neighborhoods, and actually they can put some of the funding requirement on the developers or on the constructors. So they would actually, even in terms of maintenance, sometimes municipalities are actually requiring a maintenance fund that is actually put aside for future maintenance and growing of the 330-300 elements in the neighborhood. So, but of course it is an issue, right, in terms especially of the management and maintenance. How are we going to fund things over time? Yeah. Some political parties, I have to say, are also really, like in Malmö, putting more money into trees. So they doubled their tree budget in the last years. Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Cecil, thanks very much for your talk. When you're talking about planting 3 trees, are you talking about planting 3 saplings or 5-year-old or 10-year-old trees?
Yeah, I think this depends a bit on the context, right? So, so studies show, for example, that actually planting smaller trees makes the trees more adaptable to the site, right? So in a way that could be better. But there could be reasons, of course, for trying to create a quicker image. So having some large trees in there too. So my neighborhood in Utrecht is a new neighborhood. So they went in and planted a lot of small trees, saplings, but also few big trees. So people already got the feeling, oh, there's some big trees here. But then with that came a smaller urban forest that actually has a chance to adapt to the site. So yeah, thank you.
Hi.
Okay, yeah. Go ahead. Oh, I see it. Yeah, hi.
Hi. Thanks for talking for what you do. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on the social equity aspect of it, because I couldn't help but notice that, for example, you had one of your slides, the Bosco Verticale,
yeah.
which now is at the center of the debate because it's basically a vanity project
Right.
for very rich and wealthy people, and the maintenance fees of building like that is basically higher than many salaries in Italy.
Yeah.
So what has been done and can be done more for the social equity aspect that you mentioned at the end?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really great, a very important question, right? And there's no doubt that some of the greening projects, you mentioned Bosco Verticale, which is very expensive to live in. I had a chance to visit too. There's the High Line in New York, right, that led to immense gentrification. People were pushed out of the neighborhood. Hotels came in. So it is really a problem. And I think it's really a matter also of taking that element of social justice in from the start. Some really great work done in Barcelona, for example, by a group of researchers along Maria Anguilowski. And they are actually really looking at guidelines for what can you do in terms of rent control. There's even a paper, I think, called How Green is Green Enough, right? What can you do to not go over the threshold? So I think it is a concern. Of course, it cannot be so that we don't green our cities because of it. So we have to be careful with it. And it is definitely something that we should take very seriously. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
So, like, in a place like Tokyo.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, do you want?
Maybe for the recording. Yeah.
So, oh, that's fun. So in a place like Tokyo, like that place is crowded. Like there's people in every single nook and cranny. Like, how do you guys find space for these trees in places like Tokyo or I don't know, Dubai is also really crowded. Like, how do you find spots for these? Basically, that's my question.
Yeah, it's not always easy, right, if you say. But the interesting thing is when I was in Tokyo in May, I walked the city and there were actually a lot of big streets where there were no trees. And I asked, why are there no big trees, big canopies here? Well, the next street over had it. And they said, well, no, yeah, there's underground infrastructure or people don't want trees because it's disturbing. And so sometimes it's actually mentally, sometimes it's about organizing the underground infrastructure better. So the city of Amsterdam, they now have appointed an underground planner who's actually coordinating the underground space and actually freeing up space for trees. So, because you can actually do a lot in terms of stagging cables and networks and so, but it really requires much less of that Wild West that's taking place underground. And then also encouraging those people who have gardens or even small balconies or so to green, right? To make sure plants come back into those neighborhoods as well. But yeah, I agree with you. Some areas, of course, it's more difficult than in others, yeah.
So, can we take one more? We were trees, one more. We were out of time, but one more.
One more? Okay, yeah. I'll be around, so you can always come and ask. Yeah.
Just in Ireland, I was in North County Dublin, and the new developments all have cherry laurel. Even ones planted, let's say, 2 years ago. I mean, I know it's up to the councils and their inspectors it's up to a planning condition, but it's just so prevalent, and the market gardening centres it's cherry laurel, and in the state, it's just, and then of course it's really unmanageable because I think it's kind of poisonous as well. Is there any way, as well as inspectors, of course the councils don't have enough inspectors, but is there any other way of counteracting this sort of, monoculture of cherry laurel? Because it's a quick fix.
It's a quick fix, yeah.
Planners will go for that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, this is really a problem. I think it's partly educational to work with the developers and the planners. It's about species lists, right, to make it very clear in the requirements. But then, you need the inspectors, people to follow up on it. Working with the nurseries, the garden centers is another one. So making sure there's a diversity also of native trees that could be used. But I hear you. It's really like a quick fix, tick the box, and the tree is not going to provide a lot of value. So no, the problem is not only here in Ireland, I can tell you. Yeah. I think that's it, right? Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And come up to me after if you want. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much for a very useful and interesting talk. So next up, we have some lightning talks. We're going to have 6 speakers. And I'll introduce them by name, and if you can come up and you can take a seat. So we're going to have Nora Ward from the School of History and Philosophy. We're going to have Terry Morley from the School of Geography, Archaeology and Irish Studies. If you just want to take a seat there. Liam Morrison from the School of Natural Sciences. Geisha Kinderman from the School of Natural Sciences. Mary Jo Lavelle from the School of Health Sciences, and Katrina Carlin from the School of Natural Sciences. So what I'll do is I think you know the order that you're going up in, or maybe I think it's okay. Yeah, if you just want to go in that order that you're sitting. Yeah.
The presentation will be up in that order.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Is that all right?
Let's see.
I can give him talk if you want.
Okay. Yeah, you're in the right order now, I think. Yeah. Yeah. So first, if we have Nora Ward.
Yeah, there's a clicker just by the.
There you go.
Yes, yeah.
Just right. There you go.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Nora, and I'm an environmental philosopher. And for my research, I think a lot about attention and how our experiences of place and landscape are often informed deeply by the quality of our attention. And this research interest of mine actually began when I started here at the university a few years ago. Where my office is in the philosophy department is in an old residential house, and we have a small little forgotten garden with old trees and lots of ivy and brambles and birds. And my colleagues and I, starting a few years ago, we started to try to make the space a little bit more biodiversity friendly and also student friendly. And we called it the Philosophy in the Wild Garden. And actually, though, in the process of this, we found that the garden itself had inspired a lot of thinking and rethinking about ecological attention. So as well as attending to the garden, we also started doing engaging with philosophers on attention, philosophers such as Iris Murdoch, Simone Weil, who think about the practice of attention as a moral experience. And we began to kind of make connections, draw on those, research and write individually. So fast forward a couple of years, and I, along with my colleagues, Lucy, Michaela and Chiara in the philosophy department, are now part of a research group called ERA, which is the Irish word for attention and care, which focuses explicitly on the role of attention in responding to social and ecological crises. So ERA has done a few projects, and including projects on water and philosophy for children. But the one that we're currently doing is actually, funnily enough, an international project which is happening in 12 universities around the world, which has the same name as our original garden project. So Philosophy in the Wild and Finding Hope in Mixed Communities. And this is a project that is established by the Women in Parentheses research group, and it focuses on the concept of mixed community, which is a term coined by philosopher Mary Midgley, used to highlight the reality of that we live in these multi-species interdependent communities, which are made up not only of humans, of course, but also plants, insects, animals, and a diversity of other creatures. So as part of our, as Team Galway, as part of our project, we are using our speciality in environmental philosophy, public philosophy, and philosophy for children to reconsider our habits and perceptions of attention in relation to the species who coincide and co-inhabit along with us in these mixed communities. And we have a special interest in so-called non-charismatic species. So following the philosophers I mentioned previously, species such as pigeons and ants and bats and rodents in some ways are the exactly the kinds of species and individuals who tend not to be really seen and who are often subject to the most biases in perception. We tend to think that they're useless or ugly or scary or disgusting, but in a way, so we've decided in a way that they don't deserve our attention. But for that reason, they're also the perfect subjects in which we can interrogate and challenge our attentive habits. So for our first project a couple of months ago, we worked with children in the Ballinfoyle Castlegar Community Centre, and Katrina was there as well. And we did a workshop on attention, and that helped them create and inform a biodiversity mural there. And next semester, we plan to hold a similar workshop in the university with students that will involve a combination of reflective practices of philosophical inquiry about the nature of ecological beauty, attention, and value, as well as sensory engagements, and will end with a multi-species poetry making event. And then finally, we're also holding an exhibition next spring, which will show outputs of both of these events and also seek to demonstrate the diversity and richness of our mixed community more broadly, and the importance of attending to the kind of attention that we pay to it. So I'll end here with a quote from Murdoch, and I'm probably a bit over, so thank you so much for listening.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Terry, and I'm a wetland ecologist in the discipline of geography here at the University of Galway. Peatlands I work on peatlands. Peatlands are really important. They're very strong cultural, economic, and heritage background here in Ireland. However, the status of peatlands overall, in Ireland is poor. Overall, the latest Article 17 reporting, they're in bad and deteriorating condition, so much so that they're currently we're being sued because of our failure to protect these natural habitats. This is important because after agriculture, which is 60% of the landscape, peatlands occupy over 20% of the landscape, and peat soils are even a greater percentage with some recent work that we've done with that. Peatlands, in addition, have a lot of positive ecosystem, peatlands in natural conditions have a lot of ecosystem benefits. They help support clean water, they help to increase biodiversity, they mitigate storm flows, but of recent importance, at least from a funding standpoint and a research standpoint, is their impact on emissions. And right now, drained organic soils are about half of all peatland emissions. Most of these come from drained peatlands that are currently on agricultural soils, which is about a third of the entire emissions from agriculture. Overall, it's about 5% of our national emissions profile, which is the same as from aviation. So trying to take degraded peatlands and work towards restoring them, bringing the water table a little higher, can help meet these targets. You'll hear lots of different terms like rewetting, which is what we would talk about in these central areas that are occupied maybe by SACs or conservation areas. But it's really in this mix here where it's cut over or under agriculture that occupies a significant proportion of that landscape. You can see here the areas in conservation in blue represent a very small proportion of that pie of the former peatland landscape. So what we're doing is working with state, national, international groups to help improve the status of peatlands nationally. Other projects and national schemes have been beneficial, like the acre scheme. Results-based payment schemes have been fantastic. These often are short-term projects. And so farmers looking to engage in more nature-friendly actions are met with deadlines, 5 project deadlines that don't last into the longer future. So we're looking for ways to improve that, and I'll have some examples of that. Before we can start working on restoration, we need to know where peatlands occur. And unfortunately, that is also hazy. So here's some work from the folks in the Department of Natural Sciences looking at radiometrics. I'm involved with a project using 200-year-old bog commissioners' maps to remap peatland landscapes. We can use these to assess not only what the current peat landscape is, but what that landscape was over 200 years ago, and this will help with restoration. Of course, we're working on restoration. We have several projects here in the west of Ireland, forest to bog restoration, raised bog peatlands, looking at carbon emissions and emission reductions from restoration of peatlands. And then we're also working with Bord na Móna on replanting some of their cutover bogs for coverage. One of the new projects that we have is called Palos Demos, and this is looking at polluticulture, working with farmers with Forum Connemara to plant sphagnum and other cover crops to provide a source of income on these organic soils that are currently under agriculture. So what are we doing now? What's the future hold for us? We are establishing APEX, an All-Ireland Peatland Centre of Excellence here at the university, working with the Insight Centre for Data Analytics to incorporate policies, community groups, research, and really taking all the different actors and trying to coalesce into a uniformed or unified program. So, thank you.
Nora was talking about charismatic species, but I'm here to talk about the most charismatic species of all, seagrasses. And I'm involved in a project called Climarest, which is about restoring seagrasses in Ireland for climate resilience. And I'm involved in nature-based solutions. But I'm involved in nature-based solutions in the aquatic environment. Because remember, water covers at least 70% of our planet. Why are seagrasses so important? Well, they provide us with a whole range of ecosystem services. And these services are all types of services, including maintenance of biodiversity. They give us nursery grounds for lots of marine organisms. They support fisheries. They're excellent at biogeochemical cycling, at sequestering carbon. They're actually as good, if not better, than rainforests. They're very good for climate change mitigation. They're also good at enriching the sediments in oxygen and also in stabilizing sediments and preventing coastal erosion. And the problem we have globally, not just in Ireland, but globally, is that over the last 70 to 80 years, these communities of seagrass meadows have been declining greatly. And there's obviously a number of reasons associated with that, primarily to do with deterioration in water quality as a result of activities by ourselves, including things like coastal development, intensification of agriculture, the extreme marine heat waves we're seeing. And there are many, many challenges around restoring seagrass ecosystems. One is looking at baseline data, because there aren't a lot of historical or survey data. We rely on anecdotal evidence from different regions. We also rely on the presence or the existence of herbarium specimens that allow us to see where they were in the past. And spatial and temporal data is quite scarce, because seagrasses have only more recently been appreciated and acknowledged for their great importance. So my postdoc Juan Yanez is here with me today, and Juan is working with me on this project. And this project is part of the EU mission, and the main objectives of the mission are really enshrined in the EU biodiversity strategy, the action plan towards zero pollution, the sustainable blue economy, and more recently the EU nature restoration law, which thankfully came into place in June of 2024. So the project is not just about seagrasses, but Ireland is the demonstration site, or the demo site for seagrasses. Our partners in France are looking at oyster reef restoration, and in Spain they're looking at soft bed ecosystems, particularly those that have been affected by shellfish aquaculture, and looking at lobster restoration there. And in Madeira, they're looking at hard substrates, looking at kelp forest restoration. In Svalbard, and this stretches from Svalbard in the north to Madeira in the south, and in Svalbard they are looking at protecting coastal erosion. And in many of the Arctic communities, the problem is there's actually no wastewater treatment facilities at all, that have impacted greatly on water quality in some of these areas. So our objectives are to do things like reconstruct the distribution, the historical distribution, which I said is quite difficult, to also look at the genetic connectivity, see what we have in terms of species, and then to see the different techniques and what's most effective at actually restoring them. And we have 3 species in Ireland. We have the intertidal species Zostranoltii, or Nanozostranoltii, Zostra marina, which is the subtidal species, and then Zostra marina variegata angustifolia, which is probably the intertidal version of the species. So our research is ongoing. We've been developing various techniques. Just last week we made a documentary, it's still being edited, with Zero Waste Alliance Ireland, and we'll be launching that documentary as part of the Ryan Institute in December, and we'll also be launching this poster on seagrasses and ditch grasses of Ireland. So thank you.
Excellent. Oh, sorry, there's another slide that's not mine. Hold on. There we go. Ah, there's the clicker, sorry. So yeah, my name is Miss Geisha, and I normally spend my time looking at how we can engage people with nature for the benefit of nature, but also for people's own health and well-being. But the projects that I want to talk about today actually take a slightly different approach. They're much more about communication. They're about communication about people's appreciation of nature, existing actions that they're already taking, but also addressing their fears and concerns around climate and looking at what climate hopes they have and what actions they're already taking. And for the past 2 years, I've been working with my colleagues Jessamine Fairfield and Claire Murray in particular, but also a whole range of other people on this, because it takes a whole group of people to pull off what we've been trying to do, because you need expertise. And what I needed was the expertise of performers and people who work in the performing arts, and in particular, comedians and improvisers. We have been going around the country looking at rural areas to open up conversations around climate change through improvised comedy. And yes, we do think we're hilarious when we named that particular show. Because yes, we built the city on rock and coal. And the way it works is that we would have asked our audiences as they're coming in those 4 questions. We would have given them a piece of paper and write down the answers to these questions as to what they've appreciated about the outdoors recently, what has them worried about climate change, what makes climate change hard to talk about, and also share climate confessions, the things that you're doing but you shouldn't. And based on that, we would have then started a show that either would have meant that, based on the answers that our audience have given us, our improvisers, you can see a team here, as I said, absolute professionals at what they do, would have either started a comedic sketch based around that particular answer, or else they would have had somebody like me talk about the scientific facts behind maybe the worries or their appreciation of nature as well. The idea was that we create a forum where people can come together, maybe, who don't want to just hear doom and gloom scenarios around climate change all the time, but who maybe want to take a more light-hearted approach to it, but also, want to use it as a starting point. And that's exactly what we did. We always used it as a starting point for conversations with relevant communities. We also had workshops afterwards to actually workshop through maybe hopes, fears, and ideas of what people could do. And we then looked at what people already appreciated, what actions they were already taking. And here's a very beautiful illustration by Ruth Graham, showing us what people appreciated about nature recently, and how big different items in this picture are, shows us how much people talked about it. So that's why there's a massive bird lurking in the corner there. But it just shows that people really appreciated bird and bird song, but they also appreciated sea swimming, and a whole range of other things. We're now taking the climate concerns and what makes it hard to talk about climate change, and we're looking at how we can actually feed that back into, maybe some of our policymakers, because there's a lot of really interesting work there and a lot of really interesting actions that are being taken. And speaking of actions, we had a related project called Quavenue, where we took the people in the communities that we visited for the show and actually asked them to tell us stories around their own experience of climate change, and the actions that they're already taking, because what we found was that those communities that we went to were already doing a lot of really cool work, but it wasn't really being captured. So we wanted to see if we could capture this. And so we spoke to people. Some people gave us 20 minutes to tell us what they're already doing. Other people gave us an hour or more. People were really appreciative of the fact that they had the opportunity to have an exchange with scientists, with others, around actions they were already taking, but also sort of have that appreciation of the work that they were already doing, or take the opportunity to ask for information. And what we've created is a map where people can now look up what people have said, what they've appreciated about nature, but also sort of give us an overview of the actions that they're already taking, maybe to help inspire others to do something similar in their own communities. And so there's a lovely interactive map. If you go to our website, the We Built the City website has a link to Quavenue, and there you can explore on that map what people in Ireland are already doing or what they're hoping, for the future in uncertain times around climate change. Thank you. Okay.
Hi everyone. My name is Mary Jo Lavelle. I'm a lecturer here at the University of Galway in the Department of Health Promotion. So today I'd just like to take approximately 3 minutes, hopefully I'll be on time, to talk about a very exciting new small-scale pilot with potential to roll out on a larger scale, obviously, an urban rain garden project. So the University of Galway, in collaboration with and partnership with Galway City Council, is conducting this research project, and it's got a multidisciplinary team. Some of my colleagues are listed here on screen and are here present today as well at this event. But I'd also like to just thank the funders of the rain garden development, Fáilte Ireland and the local authorities' Waters programme before I start. So just a little bit of context before I start about the project itself. So cities, as you all know, they cover approximately 2% of the Earth's land and space, and yet they're home to over 50% of the global population. They're also responsible for a significant disproportionately large amount of global resource use, global consumption, and global emissions. So just to give you an example, urban zones and residents within urban zones use approximately 78% of global energy, and they emit 60% of greenhouse gas emissions annually. So why is this an issue, or why to focus on cities? Well, first of all, by 2050, the research shows that over 2/3 of our global population are due to reside in cities or urban spaces. So this expansion is going to put excessive pressure on environment, natural resources, and pollution levels. But it's not all doom and gloom, as others have said. Urbanisation and these city zones are actually fantastic city labs and sites that we can actually focus on as sustainable solutions to climate change, biodiversity, and health challenges that we're facing. So how do we do this? Through innovation, and smart planning is one option, looking at green infrastructure and other nature-based solutions to these climate, health, and biodiversity challenges. Sorry. So I suppose this is really where the Rain Garden urban project begins. So before I move on, I suppose you might ask, what is actually a rain garden? So it's really a novel type of landscape. It's a landscaped depression that you can find, a very simple structure really, that's planted by native and local wildlife vegetation, and its purpose is really to capture and to filter rain and storm water. So quite a simple construction, and as you can see, there's just some images here of that on the screen. It's not just a function of capturing and filtering rainwater and stormwater. Rain gardens in themselves are small ecosystems. They provide habitat and food for pollinators, for local wildlife, birds, for example. They also have a cooling concept. So they have a function of the rise in heat islands and concrete jungles, and they have a cooling effect. And also then, of course, they provide urban green spaces for health and well-being benefits. So in terms of the project itself, I've just got a little visual here. We're a multidisciplinary team. We have partnership with various organisations, and we're being led by partnership with Galway City Council. There's a fantastic team of researchers and academics from the University of Galway on board. So we're looking at colleagues across ecology, microbiology, health and well-being, engineering and hydrology, just to name but a few. So it's very interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, which is fantastic to see. In terms of the aims and objectives of the project, we're looking, as I said, the project itself is very much in its initial phase one. It's a pilot that we're focusing on pre and post installation of a rain garden installation at a local site here in Galway City. So it's right on our doorstep. Many of you might be aware of it. It's the Woodkey development. So it's really a three-strand approach that we're focusing on this development and using it as a living lab. So first of all, we're looking at ecological data collection. We're looking at hydrology data collection. We're also focusing on soil sampling and microbiology, health and well-being aspects of the park in terms of park use patterns, pre and post installation, as well as health and well-being benefits and perceptions of the park to local residents and city users. And then, of course, we're looking at this project in terms of a living lab and a learning tool in terms of interdisciplinary collaboration and how we can learn from each other moving forward on research projects like this. So I suppose the Urban Rain Garden project, it's small, as I said, on scale. It's a pilot at present, and we're currently sourcing funding for this project. We have secured a sustainability fund here within the University of Galway, which is fantastic, and we have a researcher now on board dedicated to the project, as well as other team members. But really, what I see the opportunity for this project, it's a blueprint moving forward. And it's a blueprint to show how cities can embed health, equity and sustainability into simple urban infrastructure. And sorry, the last slide. So I suppose by transforming a single site into a living lab, we aim to generate knowledge really that can be used or scaled up across the country, nationally and on other larger scales. It's also about helping cities in the long term become more resilient, more biodiverse, and helping connectedness within communities and city spaces. So I'll just leave that there. That's where I end. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, I have to teach at 1 o'clock, so I have to go.
Thanks very much, Nora, and good luck with your class. While we let Nora run away, I want to start by drawing your attention to where we are here in the University of Galway, and just thank you so much for coming today. And based on the research that you've heard from my colleagues, look at our situation. We have the Corrib connecting us out with Galway Bay. Behind that, if you look across in the distance, you can just about see the hills of the Burren. Moving back across Galway Bay out to the northwest side, you're seeing the peatlands and blanket bogs of Connemara. So where we're situated, we have access to wonderful habitats, but right on our doorstep, we also have magnificent wet woodlands, we have rustling reed beds, we have magical meadows. And all of that, as you've already heard from Cecil and from Nora and from Geisha, that benefits our health and well-being no end. In particular, it helps us do our research better. So we want to think like, then how do we bring that learning forward? How do we apply that here on campus? How do we apply that with the communities that we work with? And what you're thinking about then is the stories that you've heard today, from the highlands and islands, from rural areas to urban areas, from land to sea. We are making connections with communities working locally and internationally to act for nature and to learn from nature. But we also want to take steps here on campus and build on what we've already done. We have the biodiversity trail, but there is so much more that we can do. We could do more podcasts, we could have more interpretation, and we could do more in terms of our eco-wellbeing project. So there's a lot of potential in terms of where we could go. We think about the knowledge and the connections that you've just heard in like one short space of time today. We could do more in terms of nature literacy courses, and we could try and work very ambitiously to trying to answer that question you asked, Cecil, what is a nature positive campus? So I want to leave you with just again a moment to attend, to give voice and to listen to nature. You heard about birdsong from Cecil, from Nora, from Geisha. So hopefully you should hear Coltit. You see a mute swan. There will also be a wren and a chaffinch. These are all shots from the River Corrib throughout the day. From dawn you heard birdsong. Very soon you should hear a mute swan wings flying by. And as the light fades into dusk, you should hear the spattering call of soprano pipistrelles out on the Corrib. Thank you very much.
So thank you so much to all of our lightning talk participants. I know you have posters out in the foyer, so if anybody wants further information, they can look at those. We don't have time for questions now, but hopefully you can stay over lunch, and then you can pose your questions over the lunch break to our lightning talk participants. So we will have the panel discussion now, and following that, we will have closing remarks and then lunch following that. Thank you so much.
Thanks a million, Alma. Can everybody hear me on the lapel mic okay? Yeah? I'm conscious I'm just feeling a little bit I don't want to let you leave the room because I want to keep you here for this panel discussion. It's going to be amazing. But maybe everybody wants to stand up and just shake out the shoulders and feel a little bit, yeah? Do a bit of tree pose, arms in the air, bit of a stretch. Excellent. Okay. Brilliant. Okay. And now everybody, we sit down again and we hush. So the timing is going to be, I know I'm also, as my ecosystem, my stomach is asking me, how much longer until lunch? So we're going to finish the panel discussion at 1:25. We're going to have some super fast wrap-up comments, and then lunch is going to be outside at 1:30. So do stay until lunch. Everybody is invited to share lunch together and continue the conversations. I see people are doing comfort breaks as well. I assume people are coming back. Anyway, let's introduce the panel. Kerry Doherty is going to join me here on the panel. She's an author, a nature activist, and an incredible voice. Speaking of that theme of voice for nature, she's an incredible voice for nature. She wrote a poem called The Mother Tree, which speaks the time of a tree that's on a farm in Roscommon that I'm working on. Betta Bygart is here who directed that film. So this is how I got to know Kerry, and it's been fantastic. I'm going to invite Brendan Dunford down now. Brendan is deeply active in the world of changing ideas about where nature is in our lives, working with farmers, originally from a farm background himself. In Waterford, he's been associated with the Burren for 30 years now, Brendan, I think? Yeah. I'm going to hand you each a microphone. John Stack is going to come and join us as well. John is a senior executive engineer with Dublin City Council. His work started out as being work with tanks and pipes and concrete and all the other things that engineers are working with. And he now, as he said recently on a panel that I was enjoyed, he's now working a lot more with people and plants and enjoying it very much. So welcome, John. And Paula Carney, who's a local girl. Well, she's our biodiversity officer for Galway City Council. She was apologising for her lateness this morning because she was busy moving animals into the city to do some conservation grazing. So she's got an incredibly cool job. So these are all people who are taking action on the ground. Do we have enough microphones? There's another one here. I'll hand that to you, Paula. So we've 3 between 4. We can move around as we go. So my hope is to ask questions we're now at 7 minutes to 1. So I'm going to ask this panel some questions. We'll get a conversation going. I'd love to open it up to yourselves, maybe around about 20 past, and then we'll have our concluding remarks. So I suppose, first of all, my question about, we're on our 3rd theme now, which is action. So we've heard, there seems to be mounting, increasing, there is no doubt that nature works, to use the name of this conference. Nature works. So how easy is it to take action now? Is the story changing? Are we about to see a big difference happening? We're going to start with Paul at the end there.
How easy is it? It's not easy. That's basically the short answer. I've been working very closely with Brendan, who chat about the Harris Corner, and so that was an initiative. Pardon?
Oh, the mic.
You get this better. It's on. Yeah.
There's a switch on it at the bottom, I think, just to make sure it's on. Yeah, because there's another mic there as well. Yeah, that's right.
Sorry.
Brilliant. Okay.
Apologies. Yes, so an initiative like this was the Harrison Corner, and one of it was providing funding for any landowner. So if you had a garden, people in schools, apartment homes, any access to green space. Funding was provided through the National Parks and Wildlife Service for the Local Biodiversity Action Fund. And it was basically to provide opportunity for people to green their spaces. So it could be a pond, mini orchard, mini woodland, or equally a plan for nature. A lot of people don't know what to do. They want to do something, but maybe are afraid to start, don't know where to start. So absolutely fantastic initiative, worked very closely, as I say, with Brendan and Byrne Yo. And some of those spaces, and we've wonderful community groups and wonderful volunteer groups across the city as well, and we're working in our public spaces. But there are challenges when you're working in public spaces, and particularly when it comes down to insurance, and when it comes down to, again, is this fear of putting in big trees, and with huge issues after our recent storms, regards huge trees coming down, and obviously impacting properties and impacting our infrastructure as well. So there's a lot of reticence out there with regards to public perception of certainly increasing our tree cover in the city is challenging. But we're working away. I have brought cows into the city to conservate. That was not an easy project, but they're there. No children were harmed. And so, it can be done. It takes a lot of will, and it takes bravery. It takes bravery on behalf of the City Council, bravery on behalf of people that own land to actually incorporate these initiatives. But also, particularly from a planning point of view, there's huge competition for green space in the urban centre, particularly with regards to housing. And for us to make real significant change on a landscape level, we're making fabulous progress in small areas, again, which can be very impactful, but stronger national policy that forces the politicians to do things. So we're doing our best, absolutely, and without the help of voluntary groups across the city, I couldn't do my job. But ultimately, we need to pressure on the governments to have stronger policy.
Follow up on top down. Thanks, Paula. Brendan, the Heritage Corner, Heritage Keeper projects, these are all the idea of showing people how they do things, giving them, holding their hands to tell them this is how you do it, and then they go off themselves. How much do you see that empowers people to do more as well?
Yeah, thanks. One. Oh, right. Okay, thanks for the question. It's really important that, and I point immediately to my colleague Anya Bird, who's CEO of the Bird Trust, who did a PhD a few years ago about engaging people in nature and education and so on and so forth. So Burn Bio is a charity. It started off making people aware of the burn and their roles in looking after it, making communities, farmers and others aware of their importance in conserving this landscape. But then we kind of took our education programs to a national level, and from all Anya's research, we found that actually awareness brings us so far, but action really is the transformational piece. So in all of our programs now, we built in the action piece, so people taking action, both because it's what nature really needs, but also because it's what brings people to the next level. So there's three things I think. From working with farmers to working with urban dwellers, there's three pieces I often think: the pocket, the head and the heart. I think for a lot of people there's a financial need that particularly relates to some farmers because we're sacrificing land for nature. There has to be a financial piece. But even for some people who might not be able to afford to create a pond, I think there is a need for small-scale finance, so we provide finance. Secondly, I think this is referenced earlier by Paula, people aren't quite sure what to do anymore. Because there's so many experts around nature and biodiversity now that people are left thinking, well, maybe I might do the wrong thing if I did something. So there's a real fear of doing the wrong thing, and there's a little bit of paralysis. So enabling people, giving them targeted advice, ideally at ground level, as to what they can do. And it mightn't turn out perfect, but actually you're doing something, and that's empowering. And the third piece for me, the pocket, the head and the heart, that's the piece we're missing, I think continually missing. We have to create this sense among people from farmers to urban dwellers that, look, we need you to do something for nature. This is what society needs. This is a good thing to do. This is part of what you can contribute, and everybody here can contribute something. Last point, is it hard to do things for nature? Ironically, I come from the landscape called the Burren, where as a protected landscape, it's nearly impossible to do anything for nature because you have to get permissions from all sorts of authorities. And I think you'll find yourself as well, Paula, that there's a very controlling, for all the best of intentions, planning regime now and restrictions around conservation, where it makes it actually difficult to do the wrong thing, thankfully, but actually makes it difficult to do the right thing. But as individuals, it's never been easier, I think, to take action. It's been raining acorns this year. Pick up a few acorns, put them in a pot. Even a dumbass like me can get them to grow into small oak saplings. So it's actually easy for individuals to take action, and never look to somebody else to take action before you do yourself.
John, talk to me about the Santry River project. I didn't know there was a river called the Santry River in Dublin, and I didn't know that there were 7 rivers in Dublin until I heard you mention it. So I thought Santry was just a shopping centre, but it's a river, and you're doing some fascinating work around it. So tell us about that.
It has many names. My wife's family come from Raheny, and when the project was advertised, I got a text saying, God, we never thought they'd do anything to the Rat River. So, yeah, it looks like a glorified ditch currently. Unfortunately, it's a river that's lacking in a bit of love. In the 1950s, this would have been agricultural land and broadleaf forest, but now it's residential estates and light industry. And the river the cost came from the river. It was straightened and it became part of the drainage infrastructure. So what I'm trying to do now is reverse a lot of that. And the main driver, I suppose, for me is Water Framework Directive. It has poor status under the Water Framework Directive, and there's flood risk in the area. As I said, it used to be agricultural and broadleaf forest, now it's residential, so the ecology is effectively gone. And then on top of those three, those are sort of the environmental stuff. There is, what are the needs of the people living in those communities around the river? There's very poor active travel networks, and there's almost no amenity there. There are 17 schools in the catchment and 3 playgrounds. So, come back to your point about we're all trying to do work, and we're all vying for the same piece of land, and the approach I've taken is, can we mash this into a single project and deliver multiple benefits and multiple outcomes through a single mechanism? And that has become the Santry River Restoration Agreement Project. So we have a lot of, as I said, policy and environmental and legal requirements, but there's also stuff we want to do to benefit things that aren't necessarily enshrined in policy and the law. And a lot of that's a lot of that's to do with what people need. And I said some really good point earlier on actually about the future. And I did a sustainability course some years ago, and one of the phrases that always stuck out to me was the concept of not forecasting but backcasting. So we picture what we want this area to look like in the future, and we work all the way back to now and ask, well, what do we need to do today to get ourselves there? And one of the key things I had to do for that role was communications. So we've spoken to as many people in the catchment who will listen to us, and in particular, the school children. Santry, the north of the city is a really interesting demographic in that an awful lot of people, they're born there, they live there, and they die there. A large population there never leave. So that means a significant population of the children, this is their land in the future. So I really wanted to know, how do they see this landscape? So while I'm talking about the law and our legal obligations and all the rest of it, they're looking at a landscape that they want to use, and they want to live in and have good mental health in and good health, etc., etc. So I wanted them involved in the conversation. And since then it has evolved. We are almost at the stage where we can submit for planning and start to see this project come to fruition. The river restoration on its own isn't going to achieve all of my objectives. And that's where a sub-project sort of came out of the Santry scheme called Rainscapes, and that is retrofitting nature-based solutions into all the existing housing estates to bring nature back into them. Again, if you look at tree maps of the city, the south side of the city has way more trees than the north side of the city, and the Santry is in the north side. So my ambition there is to bring this nature back into housing estates. We've just delivered phase 1 in Macaulay Park. It is a SUD scheme, Sustainable Urban Drainage, but again, we planted over 70 trees in the scheme. Some of them are necessary, some of them are requested, some of them, it looked like a good landscape fit to put them there. We've informal play features, benches, and things the communities asked for as well. So that's just a whistle-top tour of what the scheme is, but I think the key elements are that everybody's involved in this scheme, that's not just the local authority driving on something that they want to do.
It's a huge part of it. Kerry, there's a word in my head just from listening to those last 3 contributions. and it's nurture, and that idea that we've had, and I love that it's been men who've used the L word, love, this idea of love, and that's where your heart. I thought it was always head, heart, and pocket, but anyway. So, I mean, your work is in so much in that space. It's in that space of letting people express their emotions around how they feel about their own lives, the interconnection between our own health and our ecosystem health. Are you seeing a change in people's openness to have those conversations, and do you think that's going to help us to take more action?
Absolutely. Thanks very much for having me, and it's been really beautiful to be with everyone else's hearts today. And so when I was thinking about action, and obviously I'm in quite a different position from most of the speakers or panelists, in that I'm predominantly a mother, I'm a writer, I'm a grower and a holder. So my role, I work with people from all walks of life, but the people that come towards me are mostly women. They're mostly mothers. They're mostly people who have experienced loss and who really, really love the world and want to be able to be supported in continuing to love the world and supporting the people around them to continue to love the world. And love is our most active word that exists on our planetary home. So when I thought about action, I kind of split it into three things. What have we been doing as a species? What do we do? What do we kind of hope we're going to continue to do? And they fell into three G's. So we've got gathering, we've got giving, and we've got grieving. And so in order to really actively love the world in a way that we can support each other, in a way that we can be held tenderly in taking real, concrete, resilient action, we really just start here. We start by sitting together. We've always been together. We've always gathered. We've always often gathered around a fire. We've gathered in community. Our communities now as humans look less like what they used to look. They mirror the natural world generally a lot less than what they used to. So we think of things like, we've been listening to Gorgeous talk about trees and what happens in the underground network. Those kind of mycorrhizal ways of being, the way that moss, not all moss reproduce, but all moss mother. And they all provide a water flow that works. We've always gathered tightly, and it's always worked. And so in trying to take action for the natural world, which we're a part of, gathering needs to continue to be supported and held. We all need to be able to gather, and predominantly probably in these green spaces, if not around a fire. This idea of giving. We live in late stage capitalism. We are impacted on by it. We create it. Even the fact that we are all taking pictures on our mobile phones of these slides, who's creating these mobile phones, what's happening to children. So these questions are really pertinent for us. But I think I work in that way of we give everything that we can as often as we can all the time. So whether that's giving of our heart, of what our hands can do, of what's in our pocket. So it looks like instead of waiting for other people around to come and do these things for us, we set up food trains for new mothers in the area, or people who've suffered loss, or who lost a job, or who are really struggling. We grow food together. We gather. If someone doesn't have a car and we're living in a rural area, we're not hanging about waiting on bus services to come. We're driving each other places and maybe doing swaps, we're bartering. Grieving is an interesting one to talk about as a country that would have often been known for the way we handle grief. We have, and I'm speaking in general here, we have really lost the way to grieve. And when I was preparing for this, I was thinking about, can I really talk about grief on a panel that's about, hope and love and resilience and action? And actually, absolutely, we have to talk about grief, because we are losing things at a rate we've never lost before. We are losing our ability to pay attention. We are losing our ability to be with one another because we're busier than we've ever been. We have less than we've ever been, and we're working more than we've ever worked. And that loss is living in us. We wear that loss in the Irish language. We don't say we are something, we wear it. We're wearing that loss, and we can see it in how our mental health crisis is soaring. We can see it in how everything, we can see it everywhere. We just want to be held through what we're losing, biodiversity-wise. The way that we're losing terms or ideas or hopes for the future, and the way we're losing our spare time and our attention. And we really, in grief, we allow ourselves to more fully process and work through what needs to be worked through. We do it in a more resilient way. We generally, when we're grieving, we generally step back into what it means to be really, truly human, really a member of a species. Think of the way that a magpie grieves, or a mother whale, or an elephant. And, we come from a tradition of grief. Generally speaking, across the world, grief is becoming an inward again. Grief is sexy again. Keenan is in. This really means something. And I would argue that these questions of attention, voice and grieving, they're just a circle, just like everything in what we've grown up with in Ireland is we are part of a circle. It continues to turn. Yes, she's turning differently. She's turning at a different rate, but she's still turning, and we're really, really honoured to be with that turning. And as we grieve, we return to attention, which is where love begins, and grief is just love with nowhere else to go.
Thanks, Gary. Paula, I'm struck by what you said about communities and that your work would not be possible without communities. What do the communities get from working on biodiversity projects? What do you see people saying or enjoying or sharing, I suppose, as part of those projects?
See Sarah up there from, she's one of our participated in one of our community groups in the Knockcarroll area. I think it's that, I'm speaking of from people that live in the Knockcarroll area that know Sarah, that don't know each other. I think it's that side of community. And I think I'm particularly engaging with young people. When I go out to when I do get a chance to actually get out and work with the community and do pond dipping and things like that, and actually showing aspects of the environment that you wouldn't normally see, it's fabulous for all ages. And recently worked with a school in the east side of the city, and there's a lot of planting trees, and I bought them bamboo gloves and all this because they love their manicures. And we're actually talking about our relationship to the soil, and actually about how it feeds us through our food, but actually the bacteria and sort of the gut biome and all of that. So I had my hands in the soil and I was showing it and the texture of it, and they're all ripping off their gloves, and some had the stick-on nails there too. Yeah, it was just, it's like it's just giving people an opportunity just to restore that contact, and that it's all good. It's all good to touch and feel, taste, smell. Just to hug a tree is, and I think so. It forms a community, and it's a shared. Just that we are nature, so it's in us, innately in us. If we don't have the vocabulary to describe it, it's just about sharing that common feeling. So for me, that's very inspirational. I worked in consultancy for a long time, and you're detached from that community effort. And from starting with this job, it's inspirational. And equally then how they can rally together and lobby local authorities and lobby local governments to do better and to make change. So it's very, very powerful, and I think that's how people can make change, is actually by participating in community groups. Really, as it's bottom.
Yeah, get started, find your group, find your tribe and get working. John, that city community that you described so well, people who've always been in that, for their lives, how do they respond by, to that idea that they can have some involvement in creating their green spaces and maybe get hands-on with it as well?
Mostly positive. The hardest part is actually getting people to come to consultation events, possibly a bit of apathy maybe around some things until you're so far down the line of the scheme that they're like, oh wait, hang on, I'm not happy with this, and then you have a problem. But those who attend tend to be very engaged. They tend to be very knowledgeable about their area, which is very, very important for us. So for instance, the archaeology in the Santry catchment is mind-blowing. The Battle of Clontarf was fought in Santry, because in 1014, Clontarf was underwater. But so, you know...
The Battle of Santry.
It was effectively the Battle of North Dublin, because Brian Boru headed through Finglas over to Santry, met the Vikings and headed out there. But along with all the archaeology, so the locals know where sites are. And you know, when you're doing such what's basically a massive infrastructure problem or project, you need to know what you're protecting. So they have that local knowledge. They also have the local knowledge of what they did with the river growing up. Some people used to fish in it, presumably for pinkies and stuff like that. They used to play in it, and then we came along and we modified that river. I heard an incredible story about a man in his 80s telling me about his first job. He was a boy working for the postmaster in whatever the last point was before Dublin City became the country on the north side. And telling me one day he had to walk to Cabin with a message and then walk home. But just getting all that information is really, really important, because it really helps us inform how we deliver a scheme like this that's going to benefit the people who live there. And we also that there isn't a sense that we've taken away their heritage and their history and their memories and so on. And like all of that information, while it mightn't sound, well, what's that got to do with an infrastructure project? I think it has everything to do with an infrastructure project, because our infrastructure serves our people, our grey infrastructure and our green infrastructure, and they're both critical. So going back to your question, the vast majority of people who attend our events are very engaged. I just wish more of them come.
It's a great start. There is an ecological phrase that I love, ground truthing, where you can look at a map but actually that ground truthing, where you actually ask the people who live in that place. And that's been where your work is based, Brendan, that idea of. And I remember vividly going, I think I just invited myself, I wasn't being part of the group, on that first trip out to see in May, I think, on the Burn, what is growing there, and to actually just have my eyes opened to what was there and the truth on the ground there. And therefore that system where you reward farmers for having that biodiversity on their farm, as opposed to punishing them for not having it. So that, you know, how many actions and solutions are found by boots on the ground, asking people questions, listening to people, as opposed to coming in with all the answers.
Yeah, I remember doing a PhD, and I'm surrounded by students today, which is great, but you'll be comforted to know that my top research tip is go to the local pub at night and outdrink all the locals, and you'll learn so much and you hear so much and you build relationships. Actually, on a serious note, I think this notion of a kind of an embedded researcher, so you're researching within the community and you're listening. I mean, I worry sometimes about experts, and I hate being called an expert in anything. Well, I'm not anyway, but if people do call me an expert, I'm thinking that creates a kind of a block between me and them. And that's really unnecessary and bad, because I think building a relationship, building a relationship of trust with the community, understanding where they're coming from, and then taking action to address it is invaluable. So in the Burn, I spent 3 years living in the community, you know, my kids were in school, going to church, going to the pub, as I said, listening and learning. And that gives you both the knowledge and the authority to act then with the community. So you're not coming from outside, and that's very important for farmers, that it's from the voices from within, the change is coming from within, rather than being opposed from outside. And we do totally and utterly neglect the value, I think, of indigenous knowledge in this country, people's knowledge of the land. I think when you co-create with farmers, the scientists and the farmer together, those are where the magical solutions coming from, because you're harvesting generations of knowledge and then you're bringing the best of science with it. And that's what we did in the Burn, is do that. That marriage of the indigenous knowledge and the science, and come up with some really creative solutions, and that earns respect. So yeah, I think we've been lucky, we've had time to do that, but it's time well spent. I know we're in a bit of a crisis right now, an emergency, but we still need to take that time to build the relationships between ourselves as researchers and people who have a care for the environment and the communities with whom we work. So I think that's really important. The other kind of thing, I just wanted to, in case I don't get the microphone back, I was thinking about this today, this event, and sometimes it can, you know, if we're talking about small actions, like in the middle of a crisis, it's kind of, you feel a bit disempowered. But I remember chatting to a farmer one day out, I was in another part of Ireland, I was doing some articles for the Farmer's Journal, and he said, you know, with nature, it's really a case of death by 1,000 cuts. He says, it's not that somebody set out in the morning to wreck nature, but bit by bit we removed the habitats, we paved them over, we reclaimed them out to create more farmland or whatever, and bit by bit nature has been pushed kind of into a corner. And he said the solution then is to sort of, you know, thousands and millions of little restoration actions. And I think that's where pocket forest comes in. That's where the Hare's Corner, that little piece, that's a starting point, and it's hugely important for nature, but also for your first step along the journey. That's what we do with communities and schools and heritage keepers, and that's what we're doing, myself and Anke here, in a project called Refarm, which is about, you know, recreating spaces for nature on farmland. And invariably we find that when you put those spaces back, you as a farmer, for instance, are leaving a legacy for your next generation, but you're also really benefiting from the well-being generated by having a wildlife pond on your farm, by creating a new hedge. You're painting your own canvas. You're contributing something very, very special. I think it's those little changes, from planting a tree to a pocket forest, to a Hare's Corner to a refarm pond. I think that's how we get back. That's how we get back. All those little actions, I think, is how we make that help nature recover in Ireland.
1,000 acts of healing. I suppose that's another word, Kerry, that, you know, grief and healing, if we can. Yeah. It is an extraordinary time to be here. I heard a great phrase yesterday from Tim Christopherson, a German researcher, who's talking about generation restoration. You know, that is that's the generation we are part of. We're not, you know, and we're choosing to be part of that generation. Does that get you through that feeling of loss and panic and climate anxiety? And I know there's a lot of work being done in the university around about that. You know, how do you deal with the loss and move into a positive space?
Absolutely, and I definitely feel like lots of what's been spoken about is so relevant for this question, but it's really about spending time with those who are closest to what we would term the natural world. Generally speaking, what you'll find is that is children and elders, so our ancestors on both sides, because our children are our ancestors as well. And this idea of what kind of ancestor do we want to be? And I think you'll notice that you were mentioning about, you know, being in an area and being there and being with the people and with the place. And something when we think about attention, like what does it mean to pay attention in a world where our attention is being pulled left, right and centre? And so I suppose I've thought about attention in this way. So if we think about the 3 A's, so awe, awareness and acknowledgement when we think about attention. So Mary Oliver says, you know, like observe something, look at the world, acknowledge it, pay it attention, and then go off and do whatever you want to do about it. But we live in an awe-inspiring world. If we were to pretend that we didn't know how the world functioned, how we functioned as beings, if every new created being, whether it be a newly born rat, newly born rats are incredible. They're incredible. They're beautiful. They're this weird little thing. Some types of moth, you know, some types of plant life that occur in the burn that don't occur anywhere else. This awe, there's a lot of research that shows what awe does to how we move through the world. There's a lot of research that shows how the way that we are aware supports us in awareness. So, I mean, for a long time they thought that caregiving was a purely biological thing, that when you gave birth, you had the chance to become an optimal caregiver. And then a lot of research has been done. There's a really incredible book by a friend of mine, Lucy Jones, called Matrescence, that looks at actually really it's these 1,000 acts of caregiving So you don't need to have given birth to any creature, but in spending time attending to them, tending and attending to this awesome creature, we learn their ways, we learn our ways, and we enter into this dynamic that is unlike anything else. Only caregiving allows us to do this. Only the giving of care, only tending to soil, a being, our inner self allows us to kind of move into that sort of acknowledgement, which is the third A, I think, in attention, which is that we acknowledge where we've gone wrong. We acknowledge these 1,000 small cuts, but we don't let them own us, because when we acknowledge something, we take it on board. When we own it, it frees us. It is so freeing. So when you meet with a farmer and maybe you're this young activist and you're like, yeah, do you know what? Ripping out the bogs maybe wasn't the best idea, but you thought you were doing a good thing. You thought. Most people act with love. We forget this because what we're showing is the people that are a small population that don't act with love. But if we really pay attention to the people that are in our communities, to the people that are our homes, to the spiders in our roofs, I firmly believe that the paying of attention is a way back to a lot more like how our ancestors lived, and a lot more how I really do believe our ancestors in the future are going to live, because it's a circle. I feel we're at that high point.
I'm conscious we're short of time, but I did send you all there was one question I asked people to think about, so I might get a lightning answer to that question if you're happy to do that. It was, can you think of a moment which made you really happy to be doing the work that you're doing? So I don't know, Paula, do you want to start?
I think I have to say that day planting trees with the kids, I have to say it was just pure joy. Kind of really kind of like awful at the beginning, and literally down on my hands and knees and covered in mud. And actually, I think with the same school in a different group, we were digging ponds in a very limestone area, rocks with pickaxes. Don't tell them at the same time. And they just got stuck in. When we explained why we needed, because a lot of the water in that part of the city is underground. It's in our storm sewers. So it's just, I have to say, it definitely restores my faith, particularly working with young people. I have to say, it's just, and just how they get stuck in. It's just, and there's none of the cynicism or anything like that. It is inspiring, and it definitely motivates. Yeah, pure joy. Lovely. John, your moment that you're glad you're doing what you do?
Well, I have a moment that reassured me that I knew I was doing the right thing. I'm thinking about retirement, which is way down the line, but I want to leave my job knowing I made a difference. That's what drives me. I helped somebody out of pickle or whatever, and they're happy as a result of it. When I was a graduate engineer, I got my first and only thank you card from a member of the public. So, no, and that's not to say I haven't been thanked numerous ways. This is an actual physical card arrived in the post, and I was completely confused because I had no idea how significant this was. I was upgrading a pumping station in the north of the city, and an elderly lady who lived on her own was really upset because she was worried the work I was doing would give people access to her backyard. So I just stroked the pen and said, move the fence. And that was that's all it was to me, was I just moved the fence. But to her, it was so much more. And I think that type of interaction has guided my work ever since, that the work I do should be for the benefit of an awful lot more than just the niche thing I'm working on. I think that's my story.
Thanks, John. Brendan?
Yes, I was thinking about that this morning, and right now my biggest buzz is from a couple of projects, Refarm and Hare's Corner. So one of the measures we offer landowners is the creation of a wildlife pond. So pretty much every day this week I'm getting either WhatsApps or emails with these pictures or videos from farmers of ponds that they've created, and they look a bit raw, but the farmers are so excited about this pond, and following day then I might get a picture of big ducks in the pond, or one farmer in Waterford sent me a whole series of videos every week about drones over his pond, ducks. This morning he sent a picture of them. I love it, and to think that across Ireland there's farmers creating ponds and being really proud of them, and to think that there's birds flying over, having a look out, well, what's that down there? And within a few days, dragonflies, birds, finding those new habitats and bringing new species in with them, and nature starting to evolve. That gives me huge satisfaction, both from the point of view of the well-being of the landowners, but also the impact for nature. And where it might lead next, the first step, it's addictive. There's one farmer up in Leitrim, Tommy Early, who's on his 25th pond at this stage. Be careful, it's addictive.
I absolutely love this question so much, and it was really hard to narrow it down. But mine is that, so I have moved around a lot, not through choice, from very early childhood. So I'm currently in my 44th house in 41 years. I'm hoping that it's the house I'm going to stay in. It's still a derelict, and the farmer next door, we had a whole shenanigans. We had to buy some of his land off him because our house was built into the ditch. Anyway, long and short of it was all resolved. But whenever we went in to buy the land, we had to say what our job was, like what our occupation was. When I said writer, he was like, oh, it just had to be worked with. What do you mean, writer? Like, what do you mean? Kind of concept of, he just couldn't function with it. And then fast forward nearly 3 years, we've always been really pleasant, and he knows that I go away and do stuff and whatever, and he knows that recently I've been doing stuff around farming. And then about 2 months ago, he pulled up outside the door, and he'd never pulled up outside the door. He'd always waved in. He pulled up outside the door in his big 4x4, and he said, "Come here, you out here." This is like pure East Clare farmer. So I come out anyway, and I'm like in my bare feet, and I'm really like shaking. What's he going to say to me? And he said, "I have something for you." And I was like, oh my goodness, what does he have for me? It's not something you can really say to someone who's from Derry either. It's quite an unusual situation. Sorry to throw that in there. But he handed me the Farmer's Journal. And I was featured in the Farmer's Journal. And he was nearly crying with joy. "I can't believe you live next door to me. You're in the Farmer's Journal." Every single week he comes over with the supplement of the Farmer's Journal for me. And it sounds ridiculous, but that's been the highlight of my working life. I bet like your situation with Cosmopolitan, the Farmer's Journal.
Amazing. Do we have any questions for our wonderful panel? David.
Does the panel feel, and I may not have this word right, but that the educational knowledge loss that go back a generation or two where everyone knew the names of every plant, every animal, not only in Irish, in English, but also botanically, versus now where we're having to reteach everyone all of this? Has that contributed to how we've lost our connection with nature, and how we've done minor actions over our lives that have harmed nature because we haven't got that old knowledge?
Can I answer that one? Because it's a words question, is that okay? There is an awful lot of work being done around the positive side of having to learn. There's a lot of, like, when we really have to learn something, when we really have to connect over it, we give energy into it, actually the rippling effect can go really deep. And so sometimes people who didn't get allowed Irish growing up or whatever can end up, the rippling effect is much bigger. So that in some ways you have to reframe the idea of loss and look at, I mean, we've just lost Moncomb McGann, a dear friend of probably many in the room, who did ridiculously beautiful work. But when you look at how successful writers like himself and other people who are exploring these kind of ideas are, I'm deeply hopeful. I feel like, you have this little blip, but that's the way that sort of civilization works.
And cycles work. So we're going to return the cycle. I think we're going to have to wrap it up because everybody's looking very hungry. I'm going to call Katrina Carlin to come up. First of all, please thank our panel. I think they're amazing. Thank you. And Katrina, we're just going to round up. Do you want to finish first and I'll finish second, or you go first?
I don't mind. Okay. If you want, I'll come first.
Yeah,
folks, I want to thank you all. I want to thank you all for your time and your care and your attention. I want to thank everybody who was involved in all the hard work and organisation in making today come about. And in particular, because I suspect they might not thank themselves, I want to give huge thanks and gratitude to the Pocket Forest folk and the Ryan Institute, who put so much hard work and time into bringing today for us all to come here and gather and grieve and be hopeful. That's it.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. So I'm going to keep it very brief. It is just huge gratitude for you all taking time out of your day, your busy lives. As Kerry says, we are catastrophically busy these days, but having the time to come here and sit here and have these conversations, all of these conversations ripple out from this place, hopefully like something on the top of all those amazing ponds that are being created around Ireland. We do have to be hopeful, we have to be realistic, we have to be lots of things, but I think what we have to be to ourselves is just in touch with how we're feeling ourselves and then move out and take some actions. And I really want to thank all of this involvement for the Pocket Forest team, and to thank my team, Siobhan, George and I, who you would have met, and they're just a wonderful team to work with. They just make my heart sing. And also the Ryan Institute team, Suzanne and Nora and Francis Fahy, they were just incredibly helpful to organise something, because we're based in Dublin, having it organised in Galway. And I hopefully you're all feeling that it went off seamlessly, although we are running 6 minutes late for lunch, but that's not too bad. But yeah, to thank people for the effort. Something magical has happened since we came to Galway. And it's thanks to Maria Murphy, who's here in the audience, the Life's Too Good Foundation, Maria and James and their son Philip, who run this foundation, which also works with Burn Bio. And Reef Farm is really incredibly seriously looking at how they can have an impact with the money that they have in order to get a better future for our future ancestors, who Kerry brought into the room so powerfully today. So it's a real privilege to work with them. They have a real love of Galway, and that's why our pilot project, Pocket Forest Pilot Project, is here. But it's also enabled us to work with the wonderful academics, and Alma and Suzanne, thank you so much, or Sinead, sorry, thank you so much for your hosting of today. And Katrina, it's just a real thrill. And to hear all of this work happening here, I think Galway should rightly put itself on the map as a nature-based university because of where you are, the work that you have here, the talent and ability, and all of the students. It's wonderful to welcome you here, and hopefully this has inspired you to feel really happy to be in this university and part of this, as I say, generation restoration. So huge thanks to everybody. Thanks to Frances for her incredibly generous contribution to giving us this wonderful image, which I just thought it was very moving to hear you say that those hues are still as vibrant 45 years later. You know, nature works and it continues to work. And when we go back home to nature, nature is just waiting for us there to make things better, to make a future that is going to be better and a more equal, a more shared future together, being part of a, you know, the whole idea that we had of things competing, the survival of the fittest. Actually, it's the survival of the kindest. And that's where we're heading into, hopefully, a future where that is foregrounded. Nature works, nurture works. And thank you so much. Please do stay with us after lunch, because Brendan Smith, who's another hero of Galway, who created the Terryland Forest Park 25 years ago. So we get to go and see some big trees with Cecil and have a walk over there. Brendan will explain Terryland Forest Park and the magic of that. There is a Terryland River which runs in 2 directions as well. It's an incredible river, a magical place. Thank you all for helping to create magic here, and stay with us.